Chullin Daf Nun Aleph. Charlie got us down to 3 lines from the bottom of Daf Nun Amavet on Friday with the continued long list of many, many, many treifot and many, many anatomical things in animals, some of which make sense to me, some which don't, some which make sense to Amoraim, some which didn't. And we're going to see interesting Rashi at the end of the day today. We'll get to hopefully. But the Mishnah said that if you have a needle or you have a hole in the hemses of beta kosot, right, which was different parts of the stomach. I'm going to get my English to help me with some of this. Different, they call it the omesum and the reticulum, right? So those are treifo in an animal. Says the Gemara, 3 lines on the bottom, Tana Rabbanan, says the Braita, Machat shenimsu ba'ovei beta kosot, right? If you find a needle, so you shecht an animal, you take it apart, you find a needle in the wall of the stomach. Now that's a problem because the needle made a hole in it. Says the Braita, if it's mitzad echad kshera, if it's only punctured it on one side, meaning it went through one inside or outside, but didn't go all the way through, it's still kosher. Mishneit stadim treifa, but if it went through both sides, it's treifa. Now nimtzo lekoret dam, if you find on the needle a drip of congealed dried blood, then blood only happens when animals are alive. So then you know, biodua shalifnei shchita. You know that it happened, that the needle punctured the intestines, the stomach, before you shechted it, and therefore it's a treifa. But if it's lo nimtzo lekoret dam, if you don't find any blood on the needle, then biodua shalachar shchita. Then you could assume that it happened after shchita, and therefore it's not a treifa, because the needle happened, either had punctured part of the animal, but not all the way while it was alive, or it came afterwards, or it swallowed a needle. Swallowing a needle is not a treifa, right? It's only if it punctures and goes through the wall, and it happened after it already died. So that
It's
is
only if it's through two walls, right?
correct, only through 2 walls, all the way through the outside. Now, if higlid piha makeh, now if let's say you see there's like a wound in the stomach, we had this obviously with the lungs very frequently last week, and you have a little, we call them, haglada or gluda, where you get like a scab on top of the hole in the stomach. So then you know that there was a puncture in the stomach. You know that it happened at least 3 days before the animal was shechted. It was already a treifa, right? And Rashi explains the relevance of that is that if a person bought the animal, they can go back to the seller and say, I have proof that this was a treifa when you sold it to me, because I bought it from you a day ago. And there's already a scab here, so clearly it had a wound, so it was already a treifa 3 days ago. You didn't know it and I didn't know it, but the animal was proven to be a treifa. You sold me a treifa animal, give me my money back. But lo glid piamakeh, but if there's clearly a wound, but there's no scab on top of it, then you have no idea when it happened. And then hamotzi mechavero lavaraya, you'd have to prove, which you can't, of course, that at the time you bought the animal, it was already a treifa, and so therefore you would not be able to get your money back. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. My shna, why is this any different? We've been talking about holds for a couple of weeks now, right? My shna mikona kuve de alma. Why is this hole in the stomach different than every other? Well, it's not really a hole in the stomach. Why is a needle in the stomach different than every other hole in the body? Remember, we talked last week about holes in the esophagus and the trachea. What do you call it?
The ducts.
No, what do you call the esophagus?
Gullet.
The gullet, right? So why is this different than every other hole? The afagav deleka dam turf. If there's a hole in the trachea, right, or if there's a hole in the esophagus, even really the esophagus more than the trachea, even if there's no blood, it's a treifa. Answers the well, that's different because there you're talking about where you found, say, an esophagus with a hole in it. Here you found a needle specifically, and if there's a needle, then tarf mar, because hatam like immediately misrach. There's nothing for the blood to attach to. So even though there was blood, it's just an empty hole. But hachak, even to ika machat, since there's a needle here, iita dekodem shchita hu misrach havisarch. If it had happened before shchita, there would have been blood on the needle. And Tosus points out, I think it's Tosus, yeah, that obviously the same thing would be true on any other implement. It could be a coats, it could be a thorn, it could be anything else. The point is that there's an object here. And since there's an object, if the object punctured it before it died, there would be blood on the object. And so specifically by this case, you can rely on there being no blood to say it actually happened after the animal died and it's not a treifa. Now we got a story. borrow some English for the story. Amar le Rav Safra l'Abaye. This is a great story. Rav Safra, it's good for Saturday night to keep you awake. Rav Safra said the following to Abaye. Chazi mar haitzurma rabbanan da'ati memarava. Look, I came home from the store this week today, and everyone's talking about this Tzurma Rabbanan, right? This Talmud Chacham, who came from Marava, came from Eretz Yisrael. And remember, Abaye lived in Bavel. He was third generation already, many generations, maybe fourth, in Bavel. And Va'amar, and he said, this guy who came from Eretz Yisrael, Rav Avira Shmeni. My name is Rav Avira. Va'amar, and he told us, Ma'aseh, there was a story that Balifnei Rebbe, a case happened in front of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was 100 years before, so I don't think there's any way he could have seen it. We'll get the continuation of the story. But this is a famous story that I've heard over, that they brought an animal in front of Rebbe, of a machat shnimtzeit b'ovei beit hakosot mitzad echad. There was a needle that had punctured through the stomach, through one direction, v'tarfan, he made it a treifa. So now this goes against what we learned in the beginning of the day today. It has to go through both sides. So this was the talk of the town. Some guy showed up and he's got this crazy story from Rebbe that he's very confident is different than what we all thought. So Shalach lei. So I said, I talk to this guy. I want to hear more. So he sent the message, come talk to me. And the guy said, no, lo ata legabe. Person didn't show up. Okay, whatever hotel he was staying at. And he went to visit the guy. So Havikoya Igra, the man was standing on the roof, I don't know, having lunch on the porch. Amar, and so Abaye said to him, Nechad Marvaneti, come. So Abaye climbed up and went to the roof to talk to him. Amarle, and so Abaye said to this Rav Avira, who clearly, I don't know exactly why he wasn't more respectful of Abaye, Emily, tell me, Gufa du'uv dehechehavi, what actually happened? Meaning you have this story that Rebbe came with the needle in the Beit HaKosot and he said it was treifa. What exactly happened? Amarle, so Rav Avira said the following. He says, and again, the story is a very unclear story because it's really hard to imagine that these people actually lived in the same time unless he was like 100 years old, which I guess is maybe why he didn't show up. But anyways, Rav Avira says, Mafter Knisiyot Anna. I was the Mafter Knisiyot. The Mafter Knisiyot is a very interesting job. Rashi says he's the person who would gather together the students. I don't know what we call it nowadays, but when I was in yeshiva, it was the mashgiach. But the guy would show up and make sure everyone shows up in shul, right? Knisiyot means the ones who gathered together. So Rashi says he would come and he would drag them to shir, right? So that my job, I was not a rabbi, right? I had the job of gathering together the people, but I worked le'idla mi Rabbi Rabbah. I was standing above, meaning I was in the room, I guess, near Rebbe, the teacher. So this understanding that he was in the room with Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Again, it's a little hard to know how old this guy would have been, but that's what he said. Vahavi Rav Huna Tzipora, now Rav Huna from Tzipori, and Rabbi Yossi Mida'a, and Rabbi Yossi from Madai, were Yoshvin Lefanav, right? Rav Huna and Rabbi Yossi, these are very interesting. We don't usually have these names, of course. Rav Huna and Rabbi Yossi were sitting in front of Rebbe, Ubad Lifnei Rebbe, and they brought to Rebbe a case of a machat shenimtzeit b'ovei beit hakosot mitzad echad. They brought him a case of a needle that went through the stomach through one side, not both. You didn't see the needle on the other side. V'hafcha Rebbe. Now Rebbe turned the stomach over to the other side, which wasn't punctured. Umatzaleh kor dam mitrafa, and he found that there was a drop of blood there, and he made it a treifa. V'amar, and what Rebbe said was, look, I know we don't see that it was punctured on the other side, but there's blood there. Im ein sham makah, if there was no wound in the other side, kor daminaim, where did the blood come from? So basically, Rebbe made it a treifa, because even though we didn't see the puncture on the other side, from the fact that there's blood there, we know it must have happened. Now, of course, when you hear the story now, it sounds very different than when Rabbi heard in the beginning. Right? In the beginning, it sounded like, oh, it was only punctured on one side, and it's a treifa. Here, it's because it was on the other side. So Amrale, so Abaye said to this person, Rav Avira, Tra Tari Lahu Gavra, right? Meaning, Rashi has a couple explanations of this, but basically his first explanation is, or one of his explanations is, you caused me trouble to that person, meaning to myself, right? Who Gavra is how they often refer to themselves, but he translates, you caused that person trouble, meaning I didn't have to schlep. I thought you had this great innovative halacha to say from Rebbe, right? Because you were saying that if it's only one side, it's still a treifa. It turns out Rebbe was saying a case where both sides were punctured. Matnitani, that's a Mishnah, and that's our Mishnah. If you have either the hemses or the beta kosot, the omesum or the reticulum that is wounded on the outside, it's a treifa. So basically, it turns out this was a whole big nothing story, and I didn't need to schlep after you to get the story, though actually it's cute to hear all the details about your job in Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi's Beit Midrash, let's say. Okay, so that is the end of the hemses. The next case in our Mishnah, with the two dots halfway through Nun Aleph Amid Aleph, the Mishnah said if an animal is nafla min hagag, an animal falls off the roof. Now, we're going to get into this actually in much more detail later in like 4 or 5 dapim, which is a case where basically an animal falls, it gets a wound, gets into a fight, and you find no visible wounds in the animal, right? So you can't, obviously, if you see it's broke its neck, it broke its neck. But here you don't see anything abnormal. But the fact that it fell off the roof is clearly something that is dangerous, and maybe it died. Maybe there's what's called risuk evarim. It didn't die. Maybe there's its limbs are all messed up, and you have to be safek that it's a treifa. And generally, we're going to say later that an animal that falls off a roof, you can't eat it right away. You got to wait 24 hours to see if any kind of injury becomes apparent. So our Mishnah said that that's a treifa. You have to worry about it being a treifa. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Huna. Says Rav Huna, I want to make a point to you. Very interesting point, right? When we say falling off a roof, it's not that the animal fell. It's because the animal fell uncontrolled, right? Animals can jump. Animals jump off a height, right? But when an animal falls and you don't control your fall, you can fall in a way that causes a lot of injury. So says Rav Huna, very important halacha, very practical if you have animals. Hiniach behema lemala. Let's say you have an animal, it's on the roof, and you walk away and you go to do your business, your shopping, and you come back 30 minutes later, uba matzah lemata. And this animal is now off the roof on the ground. So how did it get off the roof onto the ground? Says Rav Huna, ein chosheshim mishum risuk evarim. You don't have to worry that this animal might be a treifa because its limbs got all shaken up. Because we'll see why in a second, but let's just give an assumption is because you assume that it jumped intentionally, right? That the animal chose to go from the roof to the ground, and even though it fell whatever height, 10 feet or whatever height, it did it in a way that was not concerning. Okay, you didn't see it, but you can assume that. Now we're gonna actually unpack this a little bit in the next case. The next case is a who gadya. There was a certain gidi, right? A certain little goat. The Havi Leila Ravina. Ravina owned this goat. And Chazia Chusha Biipuma Digar, right? What happened was the goat was on the roof. That's where he kept his goat, right? I guess he had a house, there was no land. The goat was on the roof. And looking through the gar is the skylight, the hole in the house, he saw an ipuma, chushla is what I'm looking for. Chushla is barley groats. I don't know what groats mean, but some kind of barley. So basically, the Gedi saw through the roof that there was delicious food down below.
It's like
And
oatmeal.
Nafal, I'm sorry?
Oatmeal.
Oatmeal, okay. It sounds delicious. Nafal me'igra la'ara, so the goat jumped down or fell from the roof to the ground and ate the goats, ate the oatmeal. Anyways, they brought Atula Kamei to Rav Ashi. Now Ravina brought this goat to Rav Ashi. Amaleni said, I don't understand. My question is do I have to worry that my animal is possibly a treifa because of what's called risuk evarim, that its limbs were injured? Amarle, so the question that Ravina asked Rav Ashi was, Had Amar Rav Huna, right? We just quoted Rav Huna as saying, that if your animal's above and you come back and it's jumped down somehow, you don't know how it got down, you don't have to worry that it was risuk evarim because it chose to come down. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a fall, it jumped down. The question I have is that because mishum de'itle nidi the misrach? Is that because that's a case where the animal can sort of hold on to or support itself on the side of the walls, meaning the way, like
Goats.
not so much mountain goats, but it can come down from the roof, but it can do it instead of just falling from the top, it can go against the wall and use its body and cushion its fall by basically using the outside of the house in order to grab onto. Now, it doesn't, obviously animals can't grab onto things, but they can push their body against it and cushion their fall the way they're going down. But this case, because we saw the gedi go through the hole in the ceiling, through the skylight, there's no wall that it could support itself by. The high left lay midi the misrach. So this gedi doesn't have anything to sort of cushion its fall, to hold on to, and so therefore maybe it is a treifa. Odilma, or is it because mishum de amda nafsha? Or is it because when an animal chooses to jump, that means that the animal made the calculation, obviously subconsciously, right? That this is a safe jump for me to make. I'm going to make it. I'm going to land. I'll have my oatmeal, but you made that choice. And so because it was a voluntary jump, it's not a treifa. And my gedi was also voluntary. He made a very conscious choice to jump down to eat the oatmeal. So also in this case, where my hide let odim mishum de amda nafsha, v'hainami amda nafsha. Amalei, and he said back to him, Rav Ashi said back to him, Mishum de amda nafsha. It's because the animal did it voluntarily. So if an animal jumps, we trust that animals make decisions that are smart decisions. I'm not sure that we trust animals so much. V'hainami amda nafsha. And basically, the animal knows itself. And so the whole concern about an animal falling is only when an animal falls accidentally. It gets tipped over, the wind pushes it over, it steps off the side by mistake, because then it doesn't have the capability to brace itself, to support its fall. But if an animal chooses to jump, it's not concerned about risuk evarim. Now, the next case, we are around the 10th last of the narrow line. Hahi imrata. There was an imra. An imra is like a lamb, I believe, right? And imrata, he translated it as a ewe. Well, it sounds like a lamb to me. The Havi Bei Rav Chaviva. Right? So they had this imra in the house of Rabbi Chaviva, the Havi Shadrin Kari Batraitu. It was dragging its hind legs. So clearly there was some wound, some defect in its hind legs, and the animal was not walking normally. So now, of course, the question is why, right? So there's a lot of possible reasons. If the animal has some wound in its leg, some infection, that's not a problem. Infections are not treifa. If it has an injury to its spine, and it's paralyzed, that's a treifa, right? We're going to get to spines, I think tomorrow maybe, but we're getting to spines, but that's a bigger problem. So Amar Rav Yemar, so Rav Yemar said, no problem. Hi shigrota nakte. This animal has been gripped by shigrota. My English here says shigrota means rheumatism, which I think is a made-up word, right? Inflammation, let's say. If this animal has some infection called shigrona, it's a nun in my shigrona, and it's not a treifa. Okay.
Here it says cramp.
Okay, cramp sounds good too. Either way, the bottom line is it's not a spinal injury. It's some infection, muscular injury, whatever it is, and you don't have to and you don't have to call it a treifa. Matkifle Ravina said, Ravina, how do you know that? Right? Maybe it's got a spinal wound. Maybe the spinal cord is cut, and that's a treifa. And Badku, in fact, they checked the animal. I guess they shechted it. They cut it open. They checked it. And it was like Ravina said, Ashkechek Ravina. I found that Ravina was right. It says more, even so, Ravina's wrong. Even so, when an animal's like this, you can possibly like Ravina because this happened to be, he was right here. But Shigrona Shchiach. It's common for animals to get these cramps or this rheumatism or whatever this infection is, but it's not a common thing for an animal to break its spine. And though it's true, he was right in this case, but that's not a proof. And generally, when you have an animal, you can rely on sorry, okay, whatever, it's too many words. But anyways, you can rely, I think I have the same source as you, Charlie, but you can rely on the assumption that it's not a treifa because it's not a spinal injury and it's just a rheumatism or cramp, okay? Inflammation. Continues the Gemara now, 5 lines from the last of the narrow lines. Amar Rafuna, says Rafuna, a very common case, which you can imagine, is let's say you've got two animals that are goring each other, that are fighting, right? Two, what do they call them? Rams that are ramming each other, and they're causing a lot of damage among each other. Do you have to worry that there's internal damage that would make an animal a treifa? So says Rav Huna, you don't worry about risuk evarim just because they're fighting with each other. So if you have a UFC event with your rams, you don't have to worry about it. My time, why? When they where am I? Oh no, I skipped some lines. Sorry. Why? What's the reason? Because I made some words up. Is something going on?
Yeah, he's here.
Okay. Afagab the midvu v'kaimi. Even though they get very painful. Mitzvu means that they're groaning and they're moaning and they're basically seem to be in severe pain. So they're nursing their wounds. It's not because they have internal damage. Simra ba'amud dinakale, it's just a simra, it's just like a fever that is gripping them, and it's not, again, an internal wound that would make it a treifa. It's just a minor, thing that's going to get better the next day. Now, however, inaful la'ara, if they fall to the ground, meaning they're slammed to the ground by the other animal, then vade chashinan. Then you do have to worry about nifula, because then basically they're pushed to the ground and they could get injured when they hit the ground.
Understand how an animal who rams itself can be in a current pain and that's allowed, but a scab is a treifa.
A scab in a certain place. No, because you don't see it. Again, this is an animal, it's a living animal. It got into a fight, it's got real injury, it's sitting on the side, nursing its wounds, but you don't call that a treifa because there's not internal damage. Like any two kids who fight, they're going to recover, they're going to get better. But obviously the scabs are very different because you see a hole in a certain body part. Amar Rav Menashe. Now, next says Rav Menashe, the next case, which is a very interesting case as well, has to do with thieves, right? Hani dichri. There was a case of dichri, which are male rams. This ganvi ganavi, and they were stolen by thieves. Now, the way you stole them is you had a fence, so you had to throw them over the fence. So the problem, of course, is that the ganavim stole these rams, and now the question is, are the rams treifa because they were thrown over the side of the fence? Says Rav Menashe, Ein choshishin mishum risukei varim. You don't have to worry about that. My time, why not? Because kishadulei amatnayu shadulei. When they throw them over the fence, they throw them onto their matnayim, onto their legs, onto their hips, as opposed to their spine, right? So the animals land feet first, and so there's no damage to the spine and to the internal organs. And why do they do that? So that they can run in front of them. Meaning the thieves are not idiots, right? They don't have to just get the animal over the fence. They gotta then get the animal to walk away. So they are very careful when they throw the animals that they throw it the right way. However, let's say they return the animals and the police catch them, so they throw the animals back over the fence. Well, then vade chashina. Because when they threw it back over the fence to return it, then they weren't careful about how they threw it over the fence, and therefore the animal might have fallen and broken its spine. And so in that case, you have to worry. It says in Gemara, but hani mili da'ajuna machmadira. That's only if they returned them because the police were coming, because they were scared. Aval machmad tshuva, if they had second thoughts and they were like, oh my gosh, we did the wrong thing, then you assume that when they returned them, they did it with care not to break them. Then tshuva mayata huda avdi. Then they did a good tshuva. So you basically have to interrogate the robbers to find out how they were throwing the animals over the fence. So anyways, very interesting halachot. Now, says the next case, Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. These are a couple of interesting cases, which I, again, not so sure how to explain all of them. 5 lines from the bottom. Hika al rosha.
You can't just wait 24 hours like in the
You can wait 24 hours.
general.
Yeah, you can. So that's what I'm saying. You'll see later that for all these things, we'll see some details as we go on. But for most of them, you can wait 24 hours. But let's say you didn't wait 24 hours, or you were really hungry. You didn't want to wait.
You want to eat that night. Okay.
Yeah, for most of these, you can wait 24 hours. We're going to get into a little more detail about some of the limitations of the animal. Meaning the other question that we haven't addressed yet is, what did the animal do after it fell, right? Did it walk? Did it get up right away? Did it stay on the ground? So that's going to be relevant as we get there. But it's correct that you don't assume it's for sure a treifa. You can wait 24 hours, but if you didn't wait 24 hours, there's no way the animal's dead. Checking it's probably not going to be enough because you don't know if there's injuries that you can't quite detect. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. Now, says Rav Yehuda Marav, when we're talking about people bashing animals, right? Hika rosha. Let's say you hit the animal on its head with a stick, right? Because you want your animal to go, or you're in the Kentucky Derby or something. The halchala kapes nava, but the animal moves, or
you're getting cut off. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me, Mary?
Yeah, now yes.
Oh, I don't know what happened. Maybe the internet's not so good. But I'm going to stop my video if that's okay. Maybe it'll make things a little clearer. Maybe it's yours, Miriam. Anyways, can everyone else hear me? Yes?
Your internet's a little choppy.
Thumbs up. Let me know. Speak up. Yeah, I can connect to my phone. Let me just do that. Give me 1 second. I'll connect to my phone. Um, Personal hotspot.
Want me to-
Sorry, 1 second. Why isn't it showing up? Oh, there.
Oh.
Uh-oh. Hello? Can you hear me now? Okay. I'm gonna stop my video just in case that slowed it down, but I'm on my phone. Okay, so hopefully everyone can hear me. Please stop us if you can't. But continues the Gemara now. We're 5 lines from the bottom of Daf Nun Aleph Amud Aleph. Says Rav Yehuda Marav, if you hit your animal, ahika al rosha, but instead of just hitting it on the head alone, the wound, the stick, basically you whip it across the whole animal. Hachla kape znava all the way to the tail, or the opposite. Al znava v'hachla kape rosha. Or keneged kol shidrat kula, you hit against the whole spine, meaning you basically smack the animal all down its spine. It doesn't matter. Ein choshishim mishum risukei avarim. You don't have to worry that its limbs were shattered, because obviously you're not hitting your animal that hard that you're going to do that. But aval ishalim chutra palgi degaba chashinam. But if the stick basically, instead of going all the way down the animal, stops halfway, then you have to worry that the tip of the stick really dug in and caused a real damage. Chashinan, you have to worry. V'yitbe kitri, and if there's knots on the stick, right, or things that stick out like branches, then also chashinan, because that could cause a lot of damage. V'machya pasket, and if you basically, that literally means that you slashed it across, so you smacked across the side, then you meaning straight across the animal, chashinan, you have to worry that maybe you damaged the spine, and in fact, it caused a problem. So the way you smack your animal, hit your animal, is very important. Continues the Gemara now, very, very interesting and very, very, I think this is fascinating halacha and question, which is, what about birth? An animal being born is a very traumatic event.
Sure.
And the question is, an animal has to get through a small birth canal. It's traumatic for the mother, but we're worried more about the kid. Do you worry that an animal that's born might have what's called risukei varim, and therefore it can never be eaten for 24 hours? Right? You'd have to wait and see if anything happens like any other animal that falls down. So do you view the trauma and the pressure of the birth as an event that could threaten the animal and is the same as falling off a cliff? So Amar of Nachman,
Is this from being born or falling from the mother to the ground?
No, being born, not falling to the ground. That's a different question. That's a good question. Just the act of being born and getting through the narrow birth canal, which, I guess
something could have been crushed.
Could have been damaged, correct. So it says Rav Nachman, Beitarechem ein bo mishum risukei varim. That's not a problem. You don't have to worry that the animal basically was damaged in its birth through the mother's Beitarechem. Amalei Rav Rav Nachman said Rav Nachman, that's a very nice halacha, and there's a braita that supports you. Tanya de Mesayelach, I have a braita that supports you, because the braita says, this braita has nothing to do with us. It has to do with Zav. The braita says this is in relation to Ziva, Tinok ben yom echad, all right, if you have a child that's 1 day old, mitameh beziva, if they see a discharge that's ziva, they become tameh. Now, if you have to assume that a newborn has damage to its limbs, then we never say there's a ziva in someone who's sick, because you always assume that if someone is sick, is ill, they're seeing blood, or not blood, they're seeing a discharge because of their illness, not because of ziva. And then you would say, ikrikan mi bisaro, it's happening because of their flesh, meaning because they're sick, v'lo machmat onso, not because of onus, of something that's uncontrolled. And therefore, you can prove from this braita that if you can have a ziva of a child that's 1 day old, that you assume that child is not damaged. Says Gemara, that's not necessarily the case, because maybe it's talking about a child that's born by cesarean. Maybe it's only a case where a child was born through cesarean section, right? In which case, there was no trauma. There was a lot of trauma, but no trauma of the limbs, right? There's trauma to the mother, but no trauma of the limbs. Tashma, okay, let's try to prove it from the next case. And this is a case in Masechet Beitza, very, very important case. We had this, if those of us who learn Beitza together, of the case of muktzah of an animal that's born on Yom Tov, right? Because remember, that when an animal is born on Yom Tov, you didn't know it was going to be born when Yom Tov started. So generally, you would think you're not allowed to eat that animal that's born on Yom Tov. But the Mishnah says that you can, because since you're allowed to eat the mother, you basically could have shechted the mother when Yom Tov started. The animal is kosher agav its mother. Okay? So says the Braita, Tashma, Ye'egel shenolad b'Yom Tov, if you have a lamb, not a lamb, a calf, that's born on Yom Tov, shochtin oto b'Yom Tov, you're allowed to shecht it on Yom Tov.
Even if
Says
it's
Gemara.
less than a day?
The problem is, you don't. What about waiting 24 hours? If you're worried that every animal that's born might be risuke varim, you can never eat an animal. So how can you shecht it on that same Yom Tov? Answers Gemara, maybe it's where it was born through a cesarean section. The mother was dying, they had to cut open the mother, and therefore that's when you're allowed to eat it that day. But if an animal was born vaginally, you couldn't eat it on Yom Tov. Says Gemara, that's ridiculous, but let's keep going and we'll see why. Tashma. The Shavin, we continue. The Gemara says they agree. There's a machloket there. There's an opinion in the Braita of a Tana who says that you can, if an animal is a bechor, right? So let's say an animal is born, it's the firstborn to its mother, and you're in Chutz La'aretz. So you can't bring that as a carbon because you're in Riverdale, right? But that animal, let's say it's born, and then 2 hours later it gets a mum. So remember, a bechor that has a mum is allowed to be eaten by the Kohen, let's say, right? And shechted and eaten. But the moment it's born, it was usher. So there's a Tana, I think Reb Shimon, who says, tell me who it is now, I'm looking at Rashi. But there's a Tana who says, someone, that you're not allowed to have the bechor because the moment the bechor was born, it was usher, and then 2 hours later it became mutter, but on Yom Tov it was usher already. However, says the Braita, and that's the quote now, Shavin, everybody agrees, we're 5 lines from the top, She'im nolad hu umumo imo, if a bechor is born, but it has a wound already, a mum, not a wound, but a wound, a blemish, when it's born, so then you're allowed to do shecht it and eat it on Yom Tov. Shezem min hamuchan. Because the moment it was born, it was mutar. Up till the time it was born, it was part of its mother, and it was mutar. Now that it's born, it had a wound the second it was born. So therefore, you can shecht it and eat it on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, but you have to wait 24 hours. So what are you going to answer? Oh, this is also cesarean. V'chitema, you say, hachanami shiatza derech dofen, but you can't have a bechor derech dofen. Derech dofen mikadosh? Does a bechor become kodesh if it was born derech dofen? V'amar Rabbi Yochanan, moda hayi Rabbi Shimon, leaning kachim sheina kadosh. Maybe that's where I was thinking Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is moda by kachim that an animal that's born through cesarean section does not become kodesh. So therefore, basically, what you can prove from this Gemara in Beitzah is that an animal that's born on Yom Tov, even through the birth canal, is not considered to be a nefula, basically, like it fell, and you can shecht and eat it right away.
Doesn't a cesarean kill the mother in that, and you can't kill the mother in the?
Well, let's say the mother's very sick; it's dying. Maybe you could cut it out. Anyways, we'll discuss it. Hachab says Gemara, we have another answer which gets to what James was bringing before, which is that it's a little bit more complicated. Because when we talk about animals that fall off the roof or animals that go through trauma, and then you have to wait 24 hours, we didn't take into account what they did after they fell. And we're going to see later that if after the animal falls, it gets up and walks away, you don't have to wait 24 hours. And so here too, we're talking about an animal that the second it was born, it stood up and hifris means it stuck out its parsa, right? It stuck out its hooves, and so it walked on the ground. And so therefore, in fact, it's not a treifa because you saw the animal walk right away. And so that is why you don't have to worry about a treifa, but it doesn't prove that if the animal didn't walk and it was born, you don't have to wait 24 hours to see if it's not a treifa. Now, continues the Gemara, Rav Nachman. We have more cases of this kind of falling animal. I don't know, we're like 10 lines from the top. Beta mitbachayim imbo mishum yisuke varim. You know, when animals are thrown to the ground in the slaughterhouse, right? They would push them to the ground. That's not considered to be risuke varim because it's meant to be done, and you don't throw them with the force that would cause a treifa. Now, hutura denafa. In fact, there was a case of a shar, of a big bull that was thrown down in the slaughterhouse to be shechted. Vishtama kol ginichuteha, and its bellowing was right. It's ginichu. Its mooing was heard for everybody to hear. So all Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta heard about this case, and he let them shecht it. And shako mishifuri shifuri. He said, "I'm going to buy the best parts of it, meaning I'm going to eat it myself. It's not a treifa." Amrale Rabbanan, so he said to the Rabbanan, Minalacha, how do you know that it's not a treifa, right? Meaning, how do you know that the fall didn't damage it? Amalon, he said, Hachi Amar Rav, because Rav said that Tzipornav no eitz ach megiel la'aretz, that when you knock an animal down, it's tzipornav, its hooves, basically, right, it means fingernails, but it means here the hooves dig into the ground until it reaches the ground, meaning the animal basically cushions its fall with its hooves. I'm Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Now says Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, and this gets to again what we were talking about before, James. Amda, when an animal falls, right, where we're going to say later, you got to wait 24 hours to see if it's going to be a treifa. If it stands up right away, then you don't need to wait 24 hours. Bidika vade boy, but you do have to check that animal, right? So if it stood up, then you don't have to wait 24 hours. You could check it right away, but you got to check that spine really well to make sure there's no treifa. But holcha, if the animal walks right away, then you don't even need to check it. You don't even need to check it because the fact that it walked away means it wasn't a major injury. And Rav Chia bar Ashi says, I disagree. You got to check it in both cases because if it had a fall and you checked it within 24 hours, you have to check it, and checking it's enough. Okay. Around halfway down. Pashta yada la'amod. If the animal reaches out its foot to stand up after it fell, that's enough. Even if it didn't stand up, it's considered not to be a treifa. Or if it moved its regel, its back foot, in order to walk. And also, even if it didn't walk, it's just showing you that the animal's got control of its limbs and it can move, and that's enough to say it's not a treifa. And Rav Chisda Amar, nin ara la'amod, if it starts, getting ready to stand up, then means you prepare yourself, right? Or like waking up in the morning, even if it didn't stand. So, sorry, I went mute there, because it's enough to show that the animal itself is motivated to walk. The Hilchata, and this is in parentheses, the Rashi and Tosfos both seem to have it because they quote part of it. But the comment from the Marshal is that this does not sound like the Gemara and was a later addition. But the halacha is, Heicha de nafla min hagag b'delo yada. If an animal fell off of the gag without its awareness, meaning the animal didn't jump off to get food, it fell off, the amda, but it stood up right away, and it didn't walk, tzricha b'dika. You can check it right away, but you got to check and make sure the spine's okay. The eino tzricha me'eit late, but you don't have to wait 24 hours. The malchan, if the animal actually walks, afila b'dika nami lo tzricha, you don't even need to check it because clearly it does not have a wound related to its fall. Okay? Now, continues the Gemara, when we talk about this checking it, what kind of checking are you talking about? And we are at the third or fourth to last narrow line. Amar Ameimar Mishmei de Rav Dimi Minarda. Ameimar said in the name of Rav Dimi Minarda, Nefula Sha'amru, when we say that it fell, you need to check it, right? What we mean is, Tzricha B'dika Keneged B'nei Me'ayim. Check around the intestines, because sometimes what happens is the intestines get ripped or torn, it falls, and that's what you have to really worry about. You have to worry about the intestines. Amalei Marzutra, now, Mar Zutra, when he said this, said, it's not true. You got to check the whole cavity, the whole inside, meaning including the spine and the ribs and all the bones that come together. Amalei Huna Mar Breder of Nechemia, the Rav Ashi, Simanim Mai. What about checking the trachea and the windpipe, right? The things that we talked about in the beginning of the Masechta, the such important things. Do you have to worry? And those also got damaged from the fall. And Amalei, he said to him, Simanim kashin heinetzon nefila. No, those simanim are considered to be hard and immune basically to the effects of falling. And you don't have to check those specifically. What you have to check are the internal organs and potentially the spine and the ribs. Okay, so that is the nefula. The next case we have, which is going to take us till the end of today, the second wide line, gets to the complicated cases of birds. I'm going to get into some very, very complex cases of birds, which is why I'm relying on my English here, about when a bird is damaged. Let's say a bird gets smacked in the air or flies into a window, right? Like birds often do. Is that bird damaged on the inside? Is that considered to be a nefula or not? So says Rabbi Yehuda Mashmol, if you have an oaf shenechbat, you have an oaf that basically collapses. It falls down al pnei hamayim. So, it sometimes happens. We don't know if the bird got into a collision midair, or something happened to it, and it crashes into the water, right? So even the crash into the water is considered to be nefula. So just like an animal hitting the ground, the bird hitting the water is damaging. Is that considered to be risuke varim, and can you shech that bird and eat it? So it says Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, It depends. If the bird walks away, it's fine. Now, how do birds walk away in the water? They swim. Kivan shashat melokomato. Once it swims the length of its body, then you could say it's essentially like walking. It's like an animal walking. Tayo, that's enough to say the bird might have been stunned, but it wasn't damaged. Now, of course, that's only if it swims against the current. Lo amrin ela mimata lamal. If it swims from lower down to up, right? Because that takes effort. Aval milmala lamata. If the bird swims from up to down, then of course it's going with the current. Mayahu dashpil. The water's carrying it, right? So that doesn't prove anything. The mayakaimi. Now, of course, if it's a standing water, like a swamp, like Rashi says, left on ba, then you don't have to worry about it up or down, right? If it swam a length of its body, that's enough to show that it's moving. The shadat siva v'kadmi. Now, let's say there's a tzivi, or I usually say wood, but he says straw for some reason here. But if there's a piece of wood in the water that basically is floating down the stream, and the bird gets ahead of the wood, it shows you that it's floating faster than the water, and then it's clearly using its muscles, and it's alive, and you don't have to worry about nifula. V'shadat sivi v'kadmi. If you throw some wood into the water, and the bird goes faster than the wood, ha-kadme, then it overtook it. So you don't have to worry about that bird. Now, let's say, this is very complicated, these cases. Where are we up to? Where am I? 6 lines from the bottom, 7 lines from the bottom. Let's say you have a glima. You have a shirt. Okay? And matiach, it's very pressured, meaning it's taut. So then, if a bird flies into that, chashina, right? Let's say you have a clothesline, you have a bird, you have a clothing that's very taut, or you put this up as a trap. You want birds to fly into it. If the bird crashes into that, you have to worry that it got injured. Obviously, if it dies, it's dead, and it's a treifa, or it's nevela. But if the bird's alive and you shecht it right away, you have to worry about risuke varim, and you can't eat it, or you gotta wait 24 hours and then eat it. The lo matiach. Now, if the shirt is not taut, then lo chashin, they don't have to worry about it because it just flew into a piece of cloth, but it was mobile. Now, if it's uf umu'ufaf, right? If it's a clothing that's folded over, right? Then lo chashin, you don't have to worry because presumably it's not so tight. Okay. Isla umikarvi kitri. If you have an isla means a net that you set up for birds, which of course is the way they would trap them. But if the knots of the net are very tightly wound, so it's a very thin net, then chashina, you have to worry because the pressure is very tough. But if it's lo mekarvi kitri, if the knots are not close to each other, meaning it's a very open net, I guess not too open because the bird gets caught there, then lo chashina, you don't have to worry about the bird getting damaged when it flew into it. The next case is kitna the avid betuni. If you have kitna, which is flax that's put into bundles, and a bird flies into that, then chashinan, you have to worry that the bird got damaged from crashing into it because that's a very dense thing. But the haigis or the haigis, if it basically crashed into the side of the bundle, so not smack on, but it sort of clipped it, then lo chashinan, you don't have to worry about that. Asuraita, now if it's asuraita, which Rashi says, and my English confirms, is a bundle of reeds that are tied together, then chashinan, again, you have to worry. A bird smashed into this thing, it stopped its flight, the whatever Newton's law there, caused the pressure to go and damage the bird. But kitna the daik v'nafetz, if you're talking about now flax that is beaten and combed, right? Daik means you beat it, and nafetz means you combed it out, right? Then lo chashina, you don't have to worry about because that's very soft. And so that's like silk. It's like flying into a thing of silk. But daik v'lo nafetz, if it's beaten but not combed, or then chashina, you have to worry about it because it's very coarse and it can cause the bird to be damaged. And if it's the avid bizri, if it's a bundle that's made up with what's bizri, it says the other kitri, right? So bizri is talking about a bunch of flax that was bundled, but it has kitri, which remember the word we had before. We had knots in it, so meaning there's basically hard parts in it. Chashinan, then you have to worry that the bird's going to get damaged. If it's dakta, which means that it's very coarse part of unspun flax, then chashinan, you have to worry about it. But if it's dakta, but if it's very, very fine, so it's thinner than the thin, then lo chashinan, you don't have to worry again because it's softer and it's like the basically like silk, and you're not worried about a bird flying into it. Again, these are all very niche kind of cases. The next case is, where are we? The last word, 2 lines on the last bottom. Navra, if you have Navra, now Rashi explains that Navra are, when you look around palm trees, you see this a lot in Israel or in countries where they have palm trees, there's like a web around the root of the palm tree that's like this flax kind of thing. It's basically, it's like I don't know how to translate into English, but they say fibers in my thing. But it's like when you,
Carry?
it's like if you look around the palm tree, next time you go to Israel, you see it on the bottom. There's like this very kind of, it's like it looks like coarse kind of what you make a sack out of, right? Like those kind of things. Anyways, if a bird flies into that chashinan, you have to worry about it because that's very hard. Timchata, but if it's called timchata, Rashi's timchata is where you take the bark and you cut into very small strips. Then that's soft, lo chashinan. And kimta nihila, if you're talking about ashes, this is kimta or kitma, sorry, or ashes that are nihila that are sifted because and then they become very hard. Chashinan, lo nihila, if you didn't sift them so that they're basically soft ashes, lo chashinan, you don't have to worry about it. And on the top of Daf Nun Bet, we'll do a couple lines so that we don't have to do this tomorrow. Chol hadak, if you have sand that's very, very thin, right, meaning very fine, then you lo chashinan, you don't have to worry about it because it's very soft. It's like when you go to the beach. You have very, very soft sand. B'chol hagas, if it's very coarse sand, then that's very hard. And chashina, you do have to worry about it. Avak drachim, if it's dirt from the road and the bird flies into it, chashina, you have to worry about that. Tivna, now let's say you have teven, you have a straw, right? The avid bizga, and you made it into a big bundle, then that's hard. Chashinan, lo avid bizga, if you didn't make it into a bundle, lo chashinan, then you don't have to worry about it because it's softer. Okay? And we're going to do a few more lines. Chite v'chol deminayo, if you have grain and anything that's made like grain, meaning Rashi says it means spelt or rye, right? So those are the things like chitin. Those kernels are very hard. And if an animal flies into a bundle of that chashinan, you got to worry that it's going to be damaged. But seori, if you have seor or things like seor, remember the partner of seor is shibolet shuel, or what we call oats. V'chol deminayo chashinan, then you also have to worry. Komine kitniot, if an animal flies into a bunch of beans that are tied together. You don't have to worry about this because beans are soft, except for one bean called the rubia. Lavarmin rubia, which we always translate as fenugreek, and I don't know what fenugreek is, but it must be something that is very hard and causes birds to get damaged. And chimtzi, if you have chimtzi, which he says here are peas, I guess they're soft enough. But chifzi, if you have chifzi, which he says are chickpeas, yeshba mishom risuk evarim, klala de milta. Let's just instead of going through every single food stuff in the world, let's give you the principle. Kol midi de mashrek, anything that is mashrek means it's slippery, then aimba mishom risuk evarim, because it basically the bird sort of flies off it. But kol mideh, that's lo mashrek, if it's not slippery and I guess it is immovable, then yeshba mishum risuk evarim, and then you have to worry that the bird is going to be damaged. So okay, this is very practical. The Rashi I want to read to you, I know it's almost 11 o'clock, everyone's very tired, but there's a very important Rashi here, which is I don't know if anyone's seen it inside. I'm going to read part of it, which is around 20 lines from the top. Right below there's a Rashi that says gapi asur, right? And so the next words in Rashi are the following. Katuv b'halachot gedolot. Says Rashi, it says in the halachot gedolot, which is the Bahag, right? The halachot gedolot. Kol heicha debay bedika. All the cases that the Gemara, like today's whole Gemara, we're going to have more of this tomorrow, which talked about checking the bird, right? Or the animal. You go nefula, shvuro, drusa. All of these cases, Hani Mili, says Rashi, b'dorot kamai. This is only true in old times. The Havi biki lemifta, because they were experts at checking. Aval anan lo bikian. We don't have expertise in checking this anymore. Velo samchina anafshin, and we do not rely on ourselves. So wherever the Gemara says you have to check it, we no longer have the expertise that is necessary to check, and you'd have to assume it's a treif.
Oh.
Says Rashi, and I disagree. The li nira, and I think, says Rashi, the ein lo ladayin al masha ein avraot, that you just deal with your current situation. Don't tell me that people used to be smarter. It's what we are today. Umutar l'smoch alav. You rely on who you have in your time. And he quotes the pasuk, "God el hashafeter sheyeh bayamim hahim." Right? So Rashi says, I disagree with the Bahag, and I don't agree with this business that you can't check things anymore. We deal with what we can deal with. However, says Rashi, Aval hu yashir yafeh lavi lefanav kol hatabachim v'chol habikim b'davar. you've definitely got to go get all the experts' opinion, right? Don't just make it up on your own. Get all the veterinarians and the people. But Rashi says, I disagree with the Bahag, and I think you can check nowadays. And I don't have any idea how we paskin, but that is a very interesting Rashi and interesting machloket. And tomorrow, God willing, in just a few hours, we will learn just how many hours? 8 hours?
Okay.
9 hours? 11 to 8, 9 hours. We will pick it up at the first word, wherever we're up to, of Davuk, around 8 lines from the top of Nun Bet Amud Aleph. Everyone have a good night.
Rashi is disagreeing with the concept of Yerida Adorot.
Yeah, no, it's a great. That's why I wanted to read this Rashi.
Rambam disagreed too.
And it's a very practical, of course, right? These are very practical
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah,
But
just-
that is Rashi's opinion.
Yasher Tov.
Okay, everyone. Shavua Tov. I hope to see you tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
So-
Okay, bye.
Thank you.